Moving into the individual parts and pieces of the bones, we're going to start with the long bone. The actual middle portion of the long bone is known as the diaphysis. This is the shaft of the bone. The diaphysis itself is made up of compact bone forming this outer shell around a hollow inside. Now, this compact bone is very dense, very solid, and it's what gives the strength and rigidity to the actual structure itself. But inside of that space is what's called medullary cavity. The medullary cavity in adults is filled with yellow bone marrow. Now, this yellow bone marrow in the middle is in adults. Now, I'm saying adults because if you go back to babies and early children, you might actually find a little more red bone marrow there. The rationale is babies growing up through early childhood, the body's growing very quickly, which means you're increasing blood volume very quickly as well. You need more red bone marrow for more blood cell production. While in adults, we're maintaining our blood supply. We're not trying to increase it. We don't need that much red bone marrow for actual blood supply. So adults, it's just yellow bone marrow. If we go to the ends, we're going to have the proximal epiphysis and the distal epiphysis. Now, proximal, remember proximity, close attachment, distal, further away. So depending on the bone, this is a femur. The proximal epiphysis is going to be found up in the hip. The distal epiphysis is going to be down in the knee itself. But these are the ends of the long bones, the proximal and distal epiphysis. They're filled with spongy bone, though. The spongy bone is all this you're seeing in here. That's the spongy bone. The spongy bone is going to allow for more structural stability and more strength in that bone. It also helps with dissipating the forces applied to the epiphysis. Now, in that in that spongy bone, you can find red bone marrow. But that's in the ends of the long bone, the epiphysis. The very edges, though, you can see it's in blue here and a little more down here. That is articular cartilage. Now, this articular cartilage is hyaline cartilage. It's meant to cover the ends of the bones. By covering the end of the bone, you're protecting from bone-on-bone impact. Instead, it's cartilage against cartilage, providing a little extra cushioning, a little extra protection, so the bones aren't grinding into each other. So you have hyaline cartilage, which is the articular cartilage, on the very outside edges of the epiphysis. Now, if we go right between the epiphysis and the diaphysis, we had the metaphysis. Now, this is going to be right here and right here is the metaphysis. They're kind of in between there. Their significance is this is where you find the actual epiphyseal plate and epiphyseal line. Now, the epiphyseal plate is we found in children. So that's the key thing, is the epiphyseal plate is in children. You might have heard of it as the growth plate. But this epiphyseal plate is how the bones can grow in length for long bones. But by adulthood, that's just an epiphyseal line. Because the actual epiphyseal plate, which was cartilage, has now gone away, it's fused together, and now it's just a remnant of what was there. Because in adults, we're not increasing in length of the bones. So the epiphyseal plate in children, epiphyseal line in adults. And then if you wrap around the outside of the bone, you can kind of see this periosteum membrane there, kind of peeling it back. The periosteum is going to be a connective tissue membrane that covers the outside of these bones. So while the bone itself is made up of osseous tissue, think back to the histology chapters, we do have this periosteum wrapped around the outside. Main ideas here, we have an inner osteogenic layer and an outer fibrous layer. So the periosteum itself is made up of two different layers. The outer layer, it's more connective tissue, more protective basis. But now the inner layer, it's actually made up of more of bone cells. is made up of your osteoblast cells. Remember, blast is forming or making. So osteoblast cells are making the bone matrix, and then osteoclast cells, which are breaking down the bone matrix. And if you're thinking, why would you want cells that make and break down at the same time? Because your body's constantly trying to maintain a homeostasis, trying to balance where the bone mass should be. Does it be thicker? Does it be thinner? Do you need more calcium in your blood? It's a constant homeostatic balancing act. We'll get into more of that when we deal with calcium regulation later. But this whole membrane, this whole periosteum is held in place by little tiny fibers that will be attaching it. They're referred to as the Sharpie's fibers. They're anchoring it, the actual periosteum, to the bone itself. So these are the Sharpie's fibers. If we look a little closer here, you can see the little box here. That's what's sent over here. But what we're looking at now is, this is going to be the actual fibrous periosteum out here. Then on the inside is where you start to see some cells in this part. So you're looking at a fibrous protective area covering over the osteogenic layer, which is the cell layers, the osteoblast and osteoclast. But then if we go to the inside, endosteum, the inside is endosteum, right here layering along the inside of the bone. So basically lining that inside medullary cavity is going to be endosteum. It's going to cover the entire inside, and it's still be connective tissue. So inside is endosteum. Get a little better look here. Again, that little tiny box is blown up much larger. So all this out here, that's going to be the osteocyte. That's the actual compact bone. But what we're looking at here, the endosteum, is this section right here. You can see the cells inside. The osteoclast cells, the osteogenic cells, the osteoblast cells. All the cells trying to maintain healthy bone tissue, which is basically the osseous tissue. So you're trying to maintain this osseous tissue as well as the entire bone structure by having the osteoblast, osteoclast cells in the endosteum inside, as well as the outside in the periosteum, allowing your bones to constantly be remodeled and the shifting of calcium matrix to make sure it's supporting the forces that you're applying to it. All right, long bones, shifting into the flat bones, more the irregular bones, and the short bones. What you're seeing right here, this is a typical view of a flat bone. You're going to see compact bone on one side, compact bone on the other side. The center is going to be spongy bone in the middle. You're pretty much making a sandwich. But that besides, not just the bone, this outside covering, what you see out here, that's going to be covering on both outsides the periosteum. So you still have the same membrane. And the inside, in between all this spongy bone, you're going to have endosteum trying to line those cavities. So the endosteum will be creating an inside layering of the bone itself. So you still have the periosteum, and inside is the endosteum. So you're really kind of thinking of periosteum, compact bone, spongy bone with endosteum, compact bone, periosteum again. So you create this whole layering effect through the flat bone here. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. There's no diaphysis. There's no epiphysis because there's no ends. You're not having a long shaft. They don't exist in here. You also do not have any of the osteons, the actual round structures. Instead, we're looking more at trabeculae here. And the bone marrow itself is in between those trabeculae. Each one of these little branches, those are all trabeculae. They're creating the structure inside the spongy bone. The spongy bone is made up of trabeculae. So while the compact bone has the osteons, the spongy bone has trabeculae. So looking inside, we mentioned this idea of bone marrow before. There are red bone marrow and there is yellow bone marrow. The red bone marrow is everything you're seeing out around here. The yellow is what's right in the middle. So you have both red and yellow bone marrow. In infants, the medullary cavity as well as spongy bone is all red bone marrow. Mentioned that earlier, how the fact at that point they're increasing body size so quickly, they're increasing blood volume very quickly. So they need as much of this red bone marrow to produce hematopoiesis, the red blood cells, the white blood cells. But by the time you get into adulthood, we have this now a mixture of red and yellow bone marrow because we don't need as much red blood cell production. So for red hematopoietic stem cells here, that is in the actual portions here. So in infants, it's everywhere. In adults, it's only in spongy bone, more in the axial with maybe the heads of the humerus and the femur a little bit. Yellow bone marrow, you're not going to find that in infants because everything's red bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow is found in more older children into adulthood. In this case, you're going to see a little bit in the very head of the femur here, but you'll find it in all medullary cavities of long bones as well. It's more of an energy reserve, an energy storage at this point. So the yellow bone marrow. So red bone marrow, yellow bone marrow. Red is hematopoietic, so forming of blood. Yellow is adipose, more of an energy storage. So some structural basis for the actual long bones, short bones, flat bones, cuboidal bones. So we have all these different bones and how they're named and structurally built at this point.